They were supposed to be invisible. A grieving single father, a daughter who hadn't spoken in years, and a pair of twin girls abandoned by everyone who should have protected them. No one expected them to stand on a stage, let alone silence an entire room. So, how did three forgotten children become the voices a nation couldn't stop listening to? What made a shy, mute girl walk into the spotlight and whisper the one word that changed everything? And why did the local school district try so hard to erase what happened that night? This isn't a story about fame. It's about fire the quiet kind, the kind that burns in your chest when the world says, "You don't belong here," and you sing anyway. From a snowbound cabin in Montana to a standing ovation in Chicago. This is the journey of a father and three brave girls who didn't just find their voices. They built something the world couldn't ignore. But the question still remains. What exactly did they lose before they learned to sing? If this opening moved you, like, share, and subscribe for the full story. Because what happens next will stay with you long after the last note fades. Elk Ridge, Montana, wasn't the kind of place you stumbled upon. It was the sort of town you ended up in when the road ran out and the map curled at its edges, nestled between slow, pine-covered hills and a dried-up riverbed. The town had more empty buildings than open ones. The grocery store doubled as a post office. The diner closed every Wednesday for restoration, though nobody remembered when it had last been restored, and winter came early like it didn't want to miss anything. Jonah Wells liked it that way. Quiet, predictable, cold. His cabin sat at the outer edge of Elk Ridge, past where the plows usually bothered to clear, just a few hundred feet from the remains of an old lumber mill. Every morning he drove his battered Ford pickup into town, worked a half shift at Benson's Hardware, and came home before the sun dipped behind the ridge. Then he'd light the wood stove, reheat something from a tin, and sit in the old recliner that hadn't creaked since his wife died. His daughter, Elise, rarely joined him. She spent most of her time upstairs, in a room that used to smell like strawberry shampoo and glitter glue. Now it smelled like dust and unplayed piano keys. It had been almost 2 years since Elise had spoken. Not a word, not a whisper. The day it happened, the middle school talent show haunted Jonah like a ghost that didn't knock. One moment. Elise was standing on stage, hands trembling at the piano. The next, she was on the floor, fainted, surrounded by whispers that hurt more than any scream. After that, she retreated not physically, not entirely, but in every way that mattered. The doctors called it selective mutism. Jonah called it silence shaped like a daughter. He didn't try to fix her anymore. He just tried to be near, like a porch light left on for someone who forgot their way home. On a Thursday in early November, the first snow came fast and quiet. Jonah was driving home from work, his windshield smeared with slush, wipers protesting with every pass. The town had already gone dark by 4:30. He rounded the bend near the abandoned rail lot, a place he passed every day without noticing when he caught a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. A hand, tiny, frantic, slapping the side of a rusted shipping container. He slammed the brakes. The truck skidded on gravel, and Jonah barely managed to steer it onto the shoulder. For a heartbeat, he sat motionless, watching the snow fall sideways through the windshield. Then instinct took over. He jumped out, boots crunching through the fresh layer. Wind bit his face, and snowflakes swirled like angry bees. As he reached the container, he heard something soft, a sound halfway between a cry and a song. Inside, curled up under a stained moving blanket, were 2 girls, twins, maybe 9, maybe 10. One clutched a crumpled piece of paper shaped like a snowflake. The other looked up at him with eyes too wide and too calm for a child in danger. "Please," the calmer one whispered, "don't tell." Jonah hesitated only a second before shrugging off his coat and wrapping it around their shoulders. "We need to get you warm," he said. "Come on." "Are you going to call someone?" the other asked, voice trembling. "I might," he said honestly, lifting the smaller one into his arms, "but right now, I'm getting you out of the cold." The cabin was warm, just barely. The wood stove had lost its prime years ago, but Jonah coaxed it to life while the girls sat beneath Elise's old quilt, sipping cocoa from chipped mugs, their cheeks flushed, eyes darting between the furniture like they were in a dream too fragile to last. "What's your name?" Jonah asked. "I'm Norah," said the bolder one. "She's Lila. We're 9.5. He smiled faintly. "Precise. Our mom always said numbers matter." He didn't ask where their mom was. Norah told him anyway. She left. Aunt Brielle was supposed to take care of us, but she said if we cried again, she'd leave us in the woods. Jonah swallowed hard. He'd heard stories like that. Most of them didn't end with cocoa and warm quilts. He stood, glanced toward the stairs. Elise's room door was still shut, still silent, but something had changed. He didn't know what yet. Maybe it was the sound of humming from Lila soft, unsure, like a lullaby remembered from someone else's dream. Or maybe it was the quiet that followed not the empty kind, but the kind that waits. That night, as the snow continued to fall outside, Jonah sat beside the fire, an untouched cup of coffee in hand. Across from him, the twins had finally fallen asleep, their heads touching, arms intertwined like roots from the same tree. The paper snowflake lay beside them, damp and wrinkled. Jonah looked toward the closed door upstairs, then at the old guitar case leaning against the wall. It hadn't been opened in 10 years, but something inside him, maybe the part that remembered what it felt like to be saved by a song, stirred. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the silence began to change. The next morning, Jonah stood outside the cabin, staring at the old shipping container where it all started. Snow had dusted over the footprints, the handprints, the trail they left behind. It was like the wind had decided to hide everything that hurt. Or maybe it was just Montana's way of starting over rough, cold, and mercilessly clean. Back inside, the smell of cinnamon oatmeal and wood smoke mingled in the air. The twins were still asleep on the pull-out couch, their bodies wrapped up tight in the oversized quilt like they'd anchored themselves to safety. Lila mumbled something in her sleep Jonah couldn't make it out, but the sound made him pause. It had been so long since his home echoed with anyone else's voice but his own. He poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying not to stare at the closed door at the top of the stairs. Elise hadn't come down yet. She never did before noon, and even then, it was like watching a ghost descend. Jonah glanced at the fireplace. The old guitar still leaned against the brick wall, untouched. He hadn't meant to leave it there overnight, but maybe it needed to be seen. An hour later, Norah stirred first. She stretched like a cat, blinked at the ceiling, and then at Jonah. No fear, just calculation, like she was working out what kind of day this might be. "Is this your house?" she asked. Sitting up. "It is," Jonah replied, "at least until the mountain decides otherwise." She tilted her head. What does that mean? He smiled gently. Just means nothing around here stays fixed for long. Lila sat up next, groggy but calmer than the night before. She didn't speak right away, but her eyes followed Jonah as he moved around the kitchen. She clung to the snowflake again, its paper now crinkled and softened at the folds. "We'll only stay one night," Norah said suddenly, her voice full of authority. "We don't want to cause problems." "You're not," Jonah said firmly. "No one should sleep in a box in a snowstorm." Norah hesitated, her lips twitching like they wanted to say something else. But instead, she nodded. She would protect her sister. Jonah could see that already. She was 9 years old and carried herself like someone who'd already learned too much about the world. After breakfast, Jonah called the sheriff's office, not to report anything, just to ask for options. No record on those names. The deputy told him, if they're runaways or abandoned, best bet is foster placement. Jonah hung up before hearing the rest. Something about the words placement and best bet felt wrong. He stared at his phone for a long time, then placed it face down on the counter. That afternoon, Elise came downstairs. She didn't say a word she never did, but her steps were quieter than usual. She hovered in the hallway, watching Norah and Lila draw pictures at the table with Jonah's old carpenter pencils. Lila hummed to herself as she worked. It wasn't a tune Jonah recognized, but it was soft and steady, like a song she used to know but only halfway remembered. Elise didn't enter the room. She didn't have to. She stood at the edge of sound and silence, and for once, didn't run away. That night, as the girls got ready for bed, Jonah sat near the fireplace again, the guitar case open in front of him. He ran his fingers along the worn wood, brushing away a fine layer of dust. The last time he played was the day Elise was born, a soft lullaby, off-key, nervous. He plucked a string. It twanged, flat and uncertain, like a voice waking up after too long a sleep. Norah wandered over, curious. "Was that yours?" "It still is," Jonah said, tightening the tuning peg. "At least, I hope so. Do you play real songs I used to?" She paused, then asked, "Can you play for us?" Jonah hesitated. He looked at the stairs. Elise's door still cracked open, the sliver of light just enough to cast a shadow down to the floor. He thought about what songs meant now, not just sound, but memory. Loss, grief, hope. "I can try," he said finally. He played a simple melody, nothing fancy, just a line from an old folk tune. The girls listened, silent, and halfway through, Lila joined in, humming that same unsure tune from earlier, but this time, it fit. Jonah didn't speak, didn't stop. For the first time in a long time, the house felt full. That Sunday night, the sky above Elk Ridge was thick with snow clouds, but the cabin glowed like a lantern tucked into the edge of the mountain. Inside, the fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows along the pinewood walls. The girls, Norah and Lila, had settled into their rhythm, not as guests anymore, but as something else. Not quite family, not yet, but something closer than strangers. Jonah watched them from his seat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. He wasn't used to this kind of sound in the house. Laughter, the clinking of spoons, two girls arguing, softly but stubbornly, over whether owls could fly without making any noise. They both turned to him like a judge at a county fair. "Depends on the owl," he said with a shrug. "But yeah, some of 'em are nearly silent. Nature's spies." Lila beamed. "Told you, she whispered to Norah, as if she'd just won something important. Jonah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His mind was still tracing the edges of a question he hadn't dared ask out loud: what happens next? Keeping them for another day felt simple. A week, complicated, longer, dangerous. The system had rules, and Jonah knew them all too well. He'd spent enough time around caseworkers after Elise's diagnosis to know how little room there was for the truth that lived between forms. After dinner, Jonah grabbed the old photo album from the top shelf. He hadn't opened it in years. Dust clung to the leather cover like it had grown roots. Norah sat beside him, curious. "Are those pictures of Elise?" He nodded. The first photo was from Elise's 3rd birthday, curly hair tangled in frosting, her mother kneeling beside her, laughing mid-blink. Jonah's heart tightened. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. "Where's your wife?" Lila asked, softly, sensing the shift in the room. "Gone." Jonah answered simply. "She passed away 4 years ago." Silence, but not the heavy kind. The girls understood that kind of silence. They'd lived it. That night, Jonah tucked them in on the pull-out couch again. As he turned to leave, Norah sat up. "Do we really have to leave tomorrow?" He paused. "No," he said, "not yet." In the hallway, Elise stood barefoot, wrapped in one of her mother's old flannel robes. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the girls, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. "You okay?" Jonah asked gently. She didn't nod, didn't speak, but she didn't turn away either. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, guitar in hand, strumming softly. Not songs, not really, just notes, wandering chords like thoughts that didn't finish. He closed his eyes and let the sound take him someplace warm, someplace before everything fell apart. In the hallway, a floorboard creaked. He didn't look up right away. When he did, Elise was sitting on the stairs, knees drawn to her chest, eyes open, watching him play. He kept playing, softer now. She didn't move, but her lips parted just slightly, not in speech, not in song, just breathing with the music. Lila appeared moments later, tiptoeing down the hall in wool socks, drawn like a moth to the firelight. She sat near the hearth, back against the couch. Norah followed next, dragging the quilt with her like a cape. And just like that, the room filled again, not with words, not even music, but something between the two. Something Jonah hadn't dared hope for. At some point, Lila hummed again, then Norah joined. Elise remained silent, but the look in her eyes wasn't distant anymore. Jonah played until his fingers ached, and even then, he didn't want to stop. They were all broken in some way, each carrying a silence of their own. But in that room, with nothing but the fire and an old guitar, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they were learning how to begin again. The snow didn't stop that week. It softened everything's sounds, edges, even time. Elk Ridge moved slower under white. Mail was late, school was canceled, and the cabin became a world unto itself, sealed in by drift and quiet. On the 4th morning, Jonah woke to the smell of toast burned slightly on one side, but unmistakably real. He wandered into the kitchen to find Norah clumsily operating the old toaster, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Lila was arranging mugs on the table like a waitress from a diner she'd only ever seen in cartoons. He chuckled. "You girls starting a restaurant?" "No," Norah said with mock seriousness, "but if we were, you'd owe us, 7 breakfasts." Lila giggled. Jonah turned to see Elise already sitting at the table. No sound, but her presence that morning felt different, grounded. She watched the scene unfolding with quiet attentiveness. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the rim of her mug, but her eyes never left her guests. It wasn't speech, it wasn't song, but it was the most present she'd looked in years. After breakfast, Norah asked if they could play the fire game again. Jonah didn't know what she meant until Lila explained. You know, when you play guitar, and we guess what the song feels like. Jonah grinned. That's a game, Norah nodded. If it feels like climbing, or like falling, or like waiting for something, Lila's really good at it. Elise tilted her head, interested. So Jonah played, no lyrics, just sound. He strummed slowly, in a minor key, letting the notes fall like snow. Waiting, Lila said softly. Missing, Norah added, but not forever, just for now. Elise looked up. She didn't speak, but she tapped once firmly on the table. Jonah's breath caught. It wasn't random. It was a beat. She tapped again. A rhythm, not accidental. Lila's eyes widened. You're playing. To Elise blinked, but she didn't retreat. Jonah started again this time. Simple chords, steady. After a moment, Elise tapped along, softly, deliberately. It wasn't music, but it was. Later that afternoon, Jonah ventured into the crawl space beneath the stairs to retrieve an old storage box. Elise's mother, Rachel, had kept journals, scribbles, songs, fragments she used to call musical sketches. Jonah hadn't looked at them since the funeral. He brought the box into the living room and set it on the coffee table. If you girls want to read something magical, he said, your minds might just catch fire. Norah opened the lid like she was unlocking a treasure chest. Inside, yellowing pages, corner-folded lyrics, napkin scrawls, torn sheet music. Lila lifted a page with the heading Winter Notes. It had no lyrics, only rhythm marks and strange chords written in Rachel's delicate script. Was this your wife's? She asked. Jonah nodded. She used to say, music doesn't always start with sound. Sometimes it starts with a feeling you haven't named yet. The girls sifted through the box with reverence, Elise watching from the edge of the couch. At one point, Lila handed her a page, no words, just notes on a treble staff. Elise traced it with one finger. Then she stood and walked upstairs without a word. Jonah didn't follow, but 15 minutes later, the faint sound of piano echoed down the hallway. 3 notes, then 4, stopped, started again, not fluid, not confident, but unmistakably hers. That evening, Jonah stood outside Elise's door. He didn't knock, just listened, inside. The twins were curled on the floor beside Elise's piano bench, sketching lyrics with colored pencils. Elise sat between them, pressing keys tentatively like someone relearning how to walk. He took a slow breath and backed away. Downstairs, he found Rachel's old recorder in the back of a drawer, small, vintage, with a cracked leather case and a mic built into the side. He charged it for the first time in years. Not for performance, for memory. He placed it on the mantel near the fireplace and pressed record. Not every song needed to be heard right away. Some just needed to be saved. By Friday, the snow relented just enough for the roads to open, school resumed, and with it came the usual small-town rituals, buses creaking over frozen gravel, backpacks heavier than necessary, and gossip that traveled faster than the wind. Norah and Lila were enrolled temporarily by the school counselor after Jonah reluctantly filled out the paperwork. He wrote foster placement pending in the guardian section, even though no one had called the state yet. Not officially, not yet. On Monday morning, Jonah dropped the girls off at Elk Ridge Elementary. They stood in front of the brick building, clutching hand-me-down gloves, eyes wide but unreadable. "You sure you're okay?" Jonah asked. Norah nodded. Lila didn't speak, but she reached out to squeeze his hand before turning toward the doors. That gesture did something to Jonah's chest he couldn't quite name. Back at the cabin, Elise stood in the kitchen, staring at the red plate Norah had insisted on saving for her. She hadn't spoken, hadn't touched the toast, but she'd come down without prompting. That was something. Jonah poured her a cup of cocoa and placed it near her elbow. "She wanted you to have it," he said. "No chips, still whole." Elise didn't look up, but her fingers closed around the mug. "She's not like the others," Jonah added quietly. "Neither of them are—" Still no answer. But that night, Jonah found a piece of paper folded neatly on Elise's pillow. 4 simple words, written in careful, slanted script. "Can I try again?" It started with humming. Norah and Lila hummed constantly, now doing dishes, brushing hair, walking to the mailbox. Not loudly, not for attention, just because they could. By Wednesday afternoon, Elise joined them. Not with words, not even harmony. But she stood near. That was enough. The auditorium at Elk Ridge Middle School was old, faded orange curtains, creaky wooden seats, and stains on the carpet that had long given up explanation. The school hosted its annual winter talent show every December. Nothing fancy. Mostly parents, cupcakes, and kids playing out-of-tune violins with great conviction. When Norah heard about it, her reaction was immediate. "We should do it." Jonah froze. "What the talent show? We sing. You play. I haven't played on a stage in 15 years. Norah shrugged. "That's not a reason. That's just math," Lila added. "We could sing the one Elise started." Jonah looked to Elise, unsure. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, but after a long moment, she nodded once. They practiced in the living room, using the fireplace poker as a mic stand and sofa cushions as spotlights. Jonah kept the guitar close, gently guiding their key changes and tempo. The girls wrote their own lyrics, simple but honest. It wasn't showy. It was real. And when Elise sat at the keyboard, fingers trembling but steady, Jonah realized something startling. She was the center, not the loudest, but the pulse. On the day of the talent show, Jonah offered to back out. The girls refused. "You're part of the song," Norah said. "You're the bones." Lila handed him a flannel shirt. "It's okay if you look like a dad." Elise didn't say anything, but she walked into the auditorium beside them, head high. The lineup was posted backstage on a crumpled sheet of paper. Their group name, no title, was written in pencil under Act 14. Jonah waited with them behind the curtain. Other kids warmed up loudly, out of tune. A boy dropped his clarinet. A teacher whispered, "Let's hope this one's not a disaster like last year." When their turn came, the lights dimmed. Someone in the audience giggled. Another whispered, "Who are they?" Then Elise stepped to the mic. She didn't sing. She just began playing. Simple, slow. The room shifted. Norah entered on the next chord, clear, confident. Lila followed, soft and grounding. By the second verse, the audience had gone completely still. Teachers leaned forward. Parents lowered their phones. Jonah sat to the side, guitar in his lap, playing a rhythm so delicate it felt like breath. Then Elise sang one line. Just one. Quiet. True. The room did not clap. Not at first. They waited. Then someone stood. Then another. And another. The applause wasn't loud. It was reverent. Like church. Backstage. Norah was radiant. Did you see their faces? Lila nodded. They stopped laughing. Elise sat on the floor, clutching the paper snowflake Jonah had found her with weeks ago. She looked at her father. He didn't say a word, but the tears in his eyes said everything she needed to hear. The talent show made the local paper, not the front page that belonged to a snowplow shortage and an op-ed about deer crossings, but nestled on the second page was a photo snapped mid-performance Elise, Norah, and Lila standing under the yellow gymnasium lights. The caption read, 3 girls, 1 voice. Jonah clipped the article and pinned it on the kitchen corkboard beside overdue water bills and Elise's old finger paintings. It wasn't about pride. It was about proof that something real had happened, that Elise had sung. The girls didn't seem affected by the attention. They had homework to finish, drawings to start, cocoa to drink. But the air in the house had changed. Elise now sat at the piano every evening without being asked. Her hands still hesitated, like she was asking permission from the keys. But the music always came. Jonah noticed something else. Too, Norah had begun writing lyrics, in the margins of her school notebooks, on paper towels, once on the back of a cereal box. Nothing complicated, just small, aching truths I was invisible until I hummed. Some people yell, we sing. Silence isn't empty, it's just waiting. He didn't correct her, he didn't offer advice, he just kept the guitar close. That Thursday. Jonah got the letter. It came in an envelope marked District Office of Youth Programming. Thick paper, embossed logo, the kind of stationery that meant someone had already made up their mind before you even opened the thing. He read it once, then again, then he sat down. Dear Mr. Wells, following the recent Elk Ridge Middle School Talent Showcase and the subsequent public interest, our board received multiple inquiries regarding the eligibility of student performers. Upon review, we have determined that your daughter Elise Wells and the Grant twins are not eligible for participation in upcoming district events, including the State Youth Arts Showcase. This decision is based on district residency policy and the current non-enrolled status of the minors involved. We understand the disappointment this may cause. Sincerely, Rebecca S., Halloran Director of Youth Enrichment Programs. Jonah crumpled the letter, then carefully uncrumpled it, smoothed it on the table, and stared at it until the words blurred. He didn't tell the girls right away. That evening, after dinner, he pulled out Rachel's old song journal. He hadn't opened it since the week she passed. The pages were full of incomplete melodies, half-sung verses, ideas scribbled in shorthand only Jonah could decipher. At the bottom of one page, written in Rachel's careful handwriting, you don't have to be loud to be heard, you just have to be brave. He swallowed hard. Elise walked into the kitchen, sat across from him, and waited. Can you write music? He asked her. She nodded. Then maybe we write something that doesn't need their stage. The next morning, Jonah read the letter aloud. The girls sat in silence, processing. Lila's face fell. Norah stared at the floor. Elise took the letter from his hand, read it again, then calmly folded it into quarters and placed it in the trash. Jonah raised an eyebrow. She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the piano, sat, and began playing the melody they'd built together the night before, soft, hesitant, but true. When she finished the first phrase, she looked at her father, then said, quietly, "We still sing." They turned the living room into a studio. Jonah borrowed an old condenser mic from the town radio host. The girls pinned blankets to the walls for acoustics. Norah cut holes in cardboard boxes to serve as makeshift sound baffles. Lila arranged every pillow in the house in a semicircle around the keyboard. Elise titled the song For the Ones Who Weren't Invited. Jonah uploaded the first demo to a private link and sent it to an old friend at a local music collective. No bio, no backstory, just one line. They said no, we said something else. Within 48 hours, the clip had been shared over 5,000 times. A podcast in Seattle featured it. A high school choir teacher in Vermont sent a thank you email. A music therapist from Portland wrote, "I played this for a girl who hasn't spoken in a year." She hummed the chorus. And late one night, Jonah opened his email to find a message from a woman named Danielle Stokes, director of Community Voices, a nonprofit that ran inclusive performance programs for kids. "I don't know who these girls are, but I think the world needs to hear more from them. Do you have a full version?" Jonah walked upstairs, stood outside Elise's door, and knocked once. When she opened it, he handed her the email. She read it, then looked up at him and whispered, "We'll need a better bridge." By Saturday, the house no longer felt like a cabin tucked in the woods. It felt like a workshop, like something alive. Elise woke before dawn and began arranging chord progressions in her notebook. Norah hunted for phrases that could land like truths, short enough to remember, deep enough to hurt. Lila, quiet as ever, drew lines between verses, little sketches of falling leaves, hands reaching, stars bursting open. Jonah, meanwhile, fine-tuned the microphone placement like it was sacred. Every chair leg had been moved 3 times. Every light adjusted. He hadn't felt this purposeful since Rachel. The house hummed with the sound of making. Not noise, not chatter, but the quiet urgency of people with something to say. By Monday, the girls had recorded 3 full songs, none of them perfect, all of them honest. For the ones who weren't invited between the fire and the silence. The song with no applause. Each track was built around Elise's piano, wrapped in the harmonies of the twins, lifted by Jonah's guitar. There was no vocal layering, no digital smoothing, just breath, just heart, just 3 girls who'd been treated like a punchline and a father who no longer let his grief decide what got to live. Jonah posted the tracks online under the name The Silent 3. He didn't tag the school, didn't name names, he didn't have to. The next morning, it began. A radio station in Missoula called, a blogger in Austin wrote an article titled, "The Quiet Kids Are Singing Now." The local news came by for an interview. Jonah declined, but handed them a USB drive with 3 tracks and a note. They're not trying to get famous. They're trying to be heard. The clip aired that evening, that night. The inbox exploded. Parents, teachers, formerly silent kids, and 1 email from a girl in Pennsylvania. "My teacher played your song." I started crying, and I didn't even know why. I think it's because I forgot that I used to sing before people laughed, but not everyone clapped. At the Elk Ridge grocery store. Jonah overheard two parents near the canned goods aisle. "That's the man raising those runaways." One whispered, "They're gaming the sympathy angle." The other muttered, "That song's not even that good." Jonah said nothing, but later, while splitting firewood, he struck too hard. A piece shattered against the log and cut his palm. Blood dripped down his wrist and onto the snow. He didn't bandage it right away. He stared at it instead, not because it hurt, but because it made him feel something other than pride or rage. It reminded him he was still raw, still real, still fighting. The next day, a letter arrived from the district. Not a cease and desist. Worse, a silence. Printed on stiff paper, professional header, no salutation, just a notice due to unauthorized media distribution involving minors on school premises. The administration reserves the right to deny future participation to any involved individuals. Jonah read it once, then pinned it next to the talent show photo in Rachel's lyric journal. He wrote 3 words in red ink beneath it. "We're not stopping." That evening, Elise found Jonah alone in the garage. She walked to his workbench, where his guitar lay open. He didn't look up, but he said, "You know, the first time I played in public, I threw up afterward." Elise raised one eyebrow. It was a church recital. I forgot the second verse, just stopped, froze like a deer. He strummed once. Someone in the second row laughed, just a little. But that sound, I still hear it. He paused. People forget that sound can wound, but they also forget sound can heal. Elise didn't speak. She just opened her lyric book and turned it toward him. On the top page, in pencil, "Let's write the song they can't erase." Jonah blinked hard, his throat tightening, then nodded. They began writing that night. It wasn't a protest song. It wasn't angry. It was clear. A melody that began with a single note one held long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough to make people turn their heads. Then a chorus that refused to resolve. A line that ended mid-sentence, and a bridge that built but never broke. A song that said, "We are here, still, and we're not asking any more." The cabin smelled like cedar and cinnamon and ambition. By the end of January, the snow outside was still stubborn, but inside, everything was thawing. The Silent Three's songs had started showing up in unexpected places. An elementary school in Oregon used one during morning announcements. A high school counselor in New Jersey played it before group therapy. A woman from a shelter in Minneapolis sent a voice memo of survivors humming "For the Ones Who Weren't Invited in a Circle of Folding Chairs." The impact was real, and so was the risk. That week, Jonah got a call from Evelyn Marks, the county child welfare caseworker. It wasn't hostile. It was worse neutral. "We've received several reports. Nothing serious, just community concern over the minors' living arrangement." Jonah bristled. "They're safe. They're thriving. I believe you," Evelyn said carefully. "But you know, we'll have to do a home check. Soon." After he hung up, he sat in the cold silence of the kitchen. The girls were upstairs working on vocal layering with Elise's makeshift metronome app. He could hear faint humming. Laughter, Lila's soft soprano trying to harmonize with Elise's cautious alto. He thought about the file Evelyn would bring, a list of everything he was supposed to be. A checklist he hadn't asked for, proof that healing wasn't always legal. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep. He sat in the garage, staring at the Taylor guitar. Rachel's old capo lay beside it, worn smooth by time. He picked it up, ran his thumb over its edge, and whispered, "What do I do now?" He half expected silence, but instead, he heard footsteps. Elise. She didn't speak. She just sat beside him, knees pulled in tight, and listened to the quiet. After a long moment, she handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it. A new verse. They can take our name. Call it a whisper, but when fire burns true, even ash sings louder than silence. Jonah looked at her. She met his eyes. No fear, only truth. The next morning, they finished the song. It was called The Sound That Stayed. They recorded it in one take. No edits, no safety net. When the final chord faded, Elise didn't speak. She just looked at Jonah, and he knew it was the one. That afternoon, Evelyn Marks arrived. She was polite, observant, professional in that clinical, heartbreaking way social workers are trained to be. Jonah offered coffee. She declined. She took notes on a yellow legal pad as Norah explained their songwriting process. She asked Elise 3 times if she felt safe. Elise didn't answer, not verbally. She sat at the piano and played a section of The Sound That Stayed, 1 minute long, no lyrics, just sound. When she finished, Evelyn blinked twice, lowered her pen, and said quietly, "Thank you." Then she left. Later that night, Jonah sat outside on the porch, breath curling in the cold air. He felt the weight of the unspoken. Elise joined him, wrapped in Rachel's old robe. She didn't bring her notebook. She didn't need it. Jonah spoke first. "They might still come for you." Elise didn't move, and I might not be able to stop them. Still nothing. "But if they do," he said, "they'll hear this house singing behind you, even if they don't understand it." Finally, she spoke. Just 2 words, "Let's sing." Word spread. It wasn't viral, not in the overnight sensation kind of way, but steady, solid, like snow building weight on a rooftop until one day it shifts and everything below feels it. A month after releasing The Sound That Stayed, Jonah received an email from the Whitman Center for Arts and Expression in Billings. "We've listened to your music, all of it. If the Silent Three would consider performing at our spring community showcase, we'd be honored. You don't need to compete, you just need to show up." Jonah forwarded it to the girls. Norah replied first, with a single word, yes. Lila followed with, "Do we get real microphones?" Elise didn't write back. Instead, she taped the word yes to her bedroom door, written in thick marker, no flourish, no decoration, just the word and the trust behind it. The Whitman showcase was bigger than anything the girls had faced before. Held in an amphitheater at the city's downtown arts center, it was a far cry from the faded gym at Elk Ridge Middle School. 300 seats, stage lighting, a sound system run by real technicians, and a guest list filled with community leaders, press, and Jonah discovered through a reluctant call Rebecca Halloran. Yes, that Rebecca, the woman from the district office, the one who had written the rejection letter, the one who had tried to disappear the girls without saying the word no too loudly. According to the event director, Halloran had been invited months ago. "She's on the board," he explained, clearly uncomfortable. "But this isn't a school event. She's just an observer." Jonah hung up the phone and went straight to the garage. He didn't smash anything, but he wanted to. The girls practiced for weeks. They chose their set list carefully, 2 original songs between the fire and the silence and the sound that stayed, and a final surprise. Something they hadn't even titled yet. Something Elise had only begun to write 2 days before. "Are we sure about this?" Jonah asked one night, watching Elise sketch notes in the margins of Rachel's old journal. Elise didn't answer. She just tapped twice on the page, her new way of saying, "Trust me." The night before the concert, Elise came down to the kitchen carrying a sealed envelope. "This is for after," she said. Jonah took it, confused. "What is it?" "Not yet," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. They arrived at the Whitman Center early. Backstage was chaos cables, clipboards, stage managers with headsets talking faster than anyone could understand. But the girls didn't panic. They found a quiet corner and waited. Elise tuned her keyboard. Norah reviewed their harmonies. Lila sat with her hand on her sister's knee, grounding her like she always did. Jonah stayed close, guitar in hand. He didn't play. He didn't pace. He just was. Then the fire alarm went off. Shrill, piercing, unmistakable. The audience hadn't even been seated yet. At first, everyone thought it was a drill. But then came the smoke. Not thick, not dangerous, but enough to clear the building. A technician had accidentally overloaded one of the older power sources backstage. Nothing serious, but the fire department still evacuated the theater. The event was postponed. Indefinitely. Outside, the air was cold. Too cold for late March. Snow still lingered in the corners of the city sidewalks, blackened by exhaust and salt. The girls stood in the alley behind the Whitman Center, wrapped in flannel and disappointment, not angry, not sad, just suspended, like a song held on the wrong chord. "I guess we go home," Norah muttered. Elise didn't move. She turned to Jonah, then said, "No, that night, they didn't go home." They drove 20 miles out of Billings, toward the Red Rock Ridge overlook, a place Jonah hadn't been in years. The sky was enormous. No buildings, no lights, just stars and wind. They set up the keyboard on the tailgate of Jonah's truck, powered it through the outlet on the trailer hitch battery. Jonah brought out the guitar. The girls stood together in the cold, breath visible, and they sang. 3 songs, no microphones, no applause, just the wind, the stars, and the truth of their voices. Lila recorded it all on Jonah's old camcorder, not for YouTube, not for promotion, just for proof. Back at the cabin, Jonah remembered the envelope Elise had given him. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence, written in her careful handwriting. "Sometimes the fire isn't on stage, it's inside." The video from Red Rock Ridge didn't explode online. It drifted, like a melody whispered into the wind. It traveled slower, but it reached further. No marketing plan, no headlines, just one quiet link, posted on a local message board by a retired teacher who'd heard about the girls from a niece in Missoula. It took 6 days. Then came the comments. I cried and didn't even know why. My daughter hasn't spoken in 3 years. She watched this and said, "That sounds like me. This isn't just music. It's memory. It's something we forgot we needed." Jonah didn't tell the girls about the views, not right away, because what mattered most hadn't changed. They were already enough. Then the invitation came. Not from a theater, not from a radio station, from the Hollow Creek Recovery Center, 2 counties south, a modest place, weather-worn siding, low funding, high turnover. But they ran music therapy on Wednesdays, and someone had played The Sound That Stayed, and someone else had cried. The center's director, Marla Jenkins, wrote in her message, "I don't know what your girls are doing, but it's working." Would they consider coming to perform for a group of women who've forgotten how to be heard? Elise read the email 3 times before she answered Jonah's question with a slow, certain nod. Norah replied by packing her lyric journal into a tote bag without a word. Lila simply whispered, "Tell them we'll come." They arrived at Hollow Creek the following Thursday. No stage, no audience rows, just folding chairs in a circle, surrounded by posters that said things like "Healing takes time" and "You are more than what hurt you." Most of the women wore neutral tones and guarded expressions. Many didn't speak at all. One of them asked, bluntly, "Are you the kids from the internet?" Norah nodded. "We're just us." That seemed to be enough. Jonah set up his guitar. Elise rolled the keyboard into the corner. They sang 3 songs. No clapping followed, but no one left either. Then, without warning, Elise stepped forward. She didn't go to the piano. She didn't hide. She stood, and she spoke. Just a few words. "My name is Elise. I was silent for 2 years. This music isn't loud, but it saved me." One of the women, sitting with her arms crossed, stared for a long moment, then quietly said, "Same." After the visit, Jonah and the girls didn't talk much in the truck, but as they turned onto the road back to Elk Ridge, Norah said softly, "I think we're supposed to do this. Do what Jonah asked. This," she said, gesturing at the world. "Go where voices are hiding. Help them come out." Jonah didn't respond right away, because deep down, he felt it too. A sense that the fire in their story wasn't meant to be kept small. It was meant to light something. When they got home, Elise taped a new sign to her door. Voices on the wind tour below it. In small letters. No stages, just places that listen. They started making a list. Libraries, shelters, juvenile centers, schools that had cut music funding, homes where grief had taken all the oxygen, and for each location, one rule: no tickets, no spotlights, only songs that mean something. Jonah reached out to an old friend from Rachel's college days, Seth Levine, a part-time sound engineer and full-time soft soul who ran a mobile recording studio out of a van. Seth drove in from Boise with a grin and a thermos of peppermint tea. He spent 2 days helping them convert the cabin's garage into a makeshift mobile-ready studio. "You've got lightning in this place," he said one night. "I've worked with 100 musicians chasing charts. These kids, they're chasing truth." As March slipped into April, the air warmed, snow melted from the pine branches, and the girls began to rehearse not for perfection, but for resonance. The first stop on the Voices on the Wind tour was a small community hall in Riverton. 50 folding chairs, a broken thermostat, coffee brewed too strong in a dented metal percolator. They sang for 27 people. One woman wept into her scarf. A teenager mouthed every word of Between the Fire and the Silence. An elderly man sitting alone in the back clapped once, just once, but with both hands shaking like applause had been waiting inside him for years. There were no social media posts, no hashtags, just people, and something starting to heal. By the 3rd week of the tour, Jonah found the envelope. It was waiting on the cabin porch one rainy morning. No return address. Inside a letter typed clean and cold, sealed with the Elk Ridge School District crest, from Rebecca Halloran, to Mr. Wells and the students informally known as the Silent Three. While we recognize your efforts to promote creative expression through music, we urge you to consider the long-term consequences of presenting minors in emotionally vulnerable performances. We have an obligation to protect students from environments that, while well-intentioned, may exploit their trauma for attention. We ask that you cease referring to the Elk Ridge talent show or using school property in promotional language. Continued public reference may result in formal proceedings. There was no signature, just a stamped name. Jonah read it twice, then slid it into the wood stove. He didn't burn it out of rage. He burned it to make room for better stories. Later that day, Elise came home from town with a cassette tape, a real one, from a thrift shop. Jonah stared at it. "You planning to time travel?" Elise smiled. Memory sounds better with a little hiss. They dug out the old deck player from the attic, dusted it off, plugged it into the garage soundboard. Then Elise said, "We should record it. Our songs, not online, something people can hold." Jonah blinked. "Like a real album, like a letter," she said. "A letter for people who don't know how to write theirs yet." They called it Echoes You Can Keep 12 Tracks. Some recorded in one take, others rewritten 5 times. One track 8 was written entirely by Lila, just piano and voice. She named it Things I Say Without Speaking. It became Jonah's favorite. They mailed out 20 copies, handwritten track lists, printed liner notes, paper sleeves sealed with a sticker that read, "If you're quiet, you're not empty. You're just full of music waiting its turn." Then the unexpected happened. The Youth Arts Federation of America, a nonprofit Jonah had never heard of, reached out. A scout had heard Echoes You Can Keep from a college student volunteering at Hollow Creek. One email turned into a Zoom call. The call turned into an invitation. "We'd like the Silent Three to perform at our National Youth Showcase in Chicago this summer. No audition. We've heard enough. We just want to hear it live." Jonah reread the email at least 6 times. He thought about the district's warning, about Rebecca Halloran, about the possibility of it all crumbling if someone pushed back hard enough. Then he thought about Lila's song, and about Elise's cassette tape, and the fire Elise lit that no one could put out anymore. He forwarded the message to the girls. Elise sent back a 1-line reply. "I'll bring the tape deck." The National Youth Showcase in Chicago wasn't a stage. It was a cathedral of sound, a glass and steel auditorium nestled in the heart of the city's arts district. Lights embedded into the walls, an audience full of critics, musicians, educators, and donors in silk scarves and tailored jackets. The Silent Three arrived in denim, flannel, and hand-scrawled lyric sheets. No PR team, no hype, just heart. Backstage. Jonah sat alone with his guitar case open, fingers brushing the old frets of the Taylor. He thought of Rachel, of the song she never finished, of the daughter she never got to hear sing. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just listened to the buzz of nerves and cables and possibility vibrating through the walls. Elise stood at the edge of the curtain. Lila and Norah were behind her, each gripping the hem of Elise's jacket like lifelines. Across the stage, a spotlight bloomed. A quiet voice from the wings whispered, "Next up, please welcome the Silent Three." No intro, no summary, just space. They walked out together. Elise at the piano, Norah holding the cassette tape, Lila holding the silence like a prayer. Jonah followed last, guitar slung low, wearing the shirt Rachel had once embroidered for his first college gig. It still fit, barely. He sat down and waited. Elise spoke first, calm and clear. "We don't have a name for this song yet," she said, glancing at the others. but maybe you'll name it for us when it's over." She nodded once to Jonah. He strummed the opening chord. Then she began. It started soft, barely there. Just her voice and one high note from the keyboard, like a question suspended in snow. Norah entered next, her voice lifting like breath on glass. Lila followed, anchoring the melody in warmth, not volume. Their voices, imperfect but true, wrapped around each other like threads in an old quilt worn, mismatched, but stitched with love. Jonah played under it all, steady, unobtrusive, a rhythm that didn't ask to be noticed but refused to be ignored. Midway through, Elise stopped singing. She looked out over the audience, then said, "This song is for the kid who never raises their hand, for the girl who hides her voice in her sleeves, for the boy whose silence was mistaken for weakness, for the ones who weren't invited. We came anyway." And then the final verse began. No harmonies, just Elise, whisper singing, "I am not noise. I am a name. I am not broken. I'm just not the same." The last chord rang out and hovered there, not in sound, in meaning. The room didn't applaud at first. They sat in the stillness like something holy had passed through. Then, one by one, they rose, a standing ovation, not for performance but for courage. No cameras, no TikToks, just people holding their breath, then letting it go. Backstage, no one said much. The girls hugged in silence. Jonah placed his guitar back in the case with a gentleness that looked like prayer. Elise reached into her backpack and handed Jonah the last cassette. The final mix. She'd written in Sharpie, "Keep this one, just in case the world forgets again." Jonah nodded, unable to speak. They drove home the next morning. Snow fell gently over the plains again, as if to tuck the moment into the ground like a seed. At the cabin, Elise walked up to her room, placed the cassette in a small wooden box, and slid it onto the shelf beside Rachel's music journal. She looked at Jonah and said, "Now we rest." And they did. Not because the music was done, but because sometimes the last note isn't the end. It's the beginning of silence that finally feels safe. Sometimes the loudest message doesn't come from a shout. It comes from a whisper that refuses to fade. Jonah, Elise, Norah, and Lila didn't set out to change the world. They just wanted to be heard. But what they uncovered was bigger than music. They revealed something raw and undeniable, that silence is often a wound made by systems too blind to see worth in quiet voices. That discrimination, whether subtle or spoken, still decides who gets a mic and who gets told to sit down. And yet, even in the face of rejection, of labels, of walls built by fear and small minds, they rose, they sang, and because they did, others found their voice too. So, if this story moved you, if it made you feel, remember, question, don't let it end here. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this is just the beginning. In the next video, we follow the Silent Three as they take their message across forgotten towns, broken places, and find something even deeper than music. Until then, remember, quiet doesn't mean invisible, and love sounds different when you actually listen.